So I'm going to jump to a conclusion and state openly that I think I've been babying you too much on this channel by doing projects that are relatively simple. Now, I know the point of a lot of those projects was to teach you some techniques, especially if you're kind of a novice to the whole laser cutting business. But now I want to do something that is, much more challenging. It's the laser work itself isn't actually all that hard. There's only 3 or 4 different kinds of parts, but there's a lot of them to cut, and the assembly can be quite tricky. So if you're really interested in finding out what this project is and how to kind of move past that novice level, then stick around and I'll show you what we're going to do here. How's it going, everybody? I'm Steve, and welcome back to the shop. As I mentioned, I want to move to something that's a little more advanced. We've been doing some novice projects to kind of work through some of the basic techniques and tips and tricks, honestly, that you want to do when you're doing laser cutting and engraving. But now I want to do a bigger project, and that's a pendant light. Now, a pendant light, if you don't know, is a hanging light. It hangs from the ceiling on a typically a cord or a rope. We'll make one of those that you can hang anywhere in your house. They look fantastic. Now, I did a video recently describing Fusion 360, and the reason I did it was so that I could talk about this video, because while there aren't very many variations of parts in this light, there's only 4 or 5, there's a lot to visualize. So you really need a 3D CAD tool of some sort to kind of assemble it all in virtual space so that you know when you cut things out, they're actually going to fit together and things are going to work the way you expect. Now, if you don't want to use a CAD tool, or you don't have a CAD tool, even though they're free, feel free to hang around to the end, and I'll tell you how you can download all of the files for this project, and you can make one of these yourself, even if you don't have a CAD tool. But I'm going to use Fusion 360 to kind of walk you through how I created all these parts and how I assembled them. Anyway, let's get going. Okay, so here's our assembly mock-up in Fusion 360, and you can see there's a top piece, and it's got some holes in the top here just for air ventilation. Now, you should use an LED bulb in this light, because you don't really want anything to get hot here, and LED lights run really cool. Now, these holes, if there is heat though, these holes will vent it out, but there's also a hole here in the top, a bigger hole that's where the light socket will screw in, and you can just put it in that hole and then use a threaded nut on the other side and it clamps it in. So that's the mounting system for the light, and ultimately how you hang it. Down on the bottom we have a similar plate. It has no vent holes in it, but it does have a bigger hole, and that's so that you can get your hand in there to put the light bulb in, but also to let as much light as possible out. And the reason for that is because we're going to actually put a vellum or paper tube in the center here, which is another reason why you don't want to use an incandescent light. You'll burn your house down. So that's it. And then in the center we have just a center bar, and these flanges, I arbitrarily called them flanges. They come down and they attach to the top and they attach to the middle. And because my laser is only, it's a Muse 3D, it's only about 12 inches by 20 inches. It isn't big enough to cut this entire circle. This circle is about 18 inches in diameter, so it's pretty substantial. So what I did to kind of hack around this is I created these little pieces here, and while I said there's no glue in this project, and technically there wouldn't be if I could cut a big enough piece, these little flanges, I just put some 3M tape on them, and when I assembled the light, I just kind of stuck them in there, and they literally just hold these 2 pieces together. Because of the way this is assembled, there's very little stress on any part here in the middle, because the gravity pulling down this light actually forces all these pieces in towards the center. And because there's a tight kind of coupling at the top here, and I'll show you what all these pieces look like individually, they basically kind of hold each other together. So the light just hanging actually forces itself together rather than trying to pull apart. So anyway, that's the light, and we'll build this. And as I mentioned, there's only a few pieces. There's a top, a bottom, these outer rings, and these kind of clamping pieces, and then these flanges. Now, the downside, as you can see, is there are a lot of these flanges. And when I built this thing originally, the person I built this for said, I want this to look nice. They were trying to match their hardwood floor. So what I did was build this out of walnut plywood, which is quite expensive. And I did the whole, are you sure? Because I don't make any money, whether it's walnut or something like Baltic birch. I just charge less if it's Baltic birch. But there was quite an insistence that this had to be walnut. So this implementation here is quite expensive, but if you make this out of Baltic birch, it will be, relatively cheap to cut. But there are a lot of these. There's 48 of these flange pieces that you have to cut, and so it takes a while. It's a bit of a challenge, but it assembles up and it looks really nice when it's done. It's a good project to kind of put you to work, but as I mentioned, you'll get something that looks really cool out of this. And then inside of it, after or even while you're assembling it, you can put a vellum tube just to kind of cast the light a little better so that it's not so blinding when you turn the light on. Anyway, we'll do a whole bunch of cutting now, and then I'll show you how to put all this together. Okay, we're going to put this together now, and what I did was I kind of pre-assembled the outer ring with the clamps, so we won't have to do that. And all I did when I did that was on the joint where the pieces fit together, I just put one of these pieces in, and then made sure that the gluing clamps were tight in there so that there's not interference. So that's all I did. Now we're going to start with, we'll do the top first. And to start this, the first one is actually not too bad to start. So we'll start at one of those joints actually, and I'll just put one together here to start. Now we're going to go every second on the middle ring, every second hole slot will be for the top, and the alternate slots will be for the bottom. But on the rings on the top and bottom, we'll use every slot. So really all we have to do is we'll skip a slot and we'll go to the next slot. And they're a bit tricky to put in. The way I found the best way to start them or to get them in is to just start it on the bottom and then get the slot going on the top and kind of work them both in at the same time. And that's how I kind of put them together. So what I'll do is I'll just put the rest of the top together, and then we'll take a look at what we're going to do next here. Okay, we'll install assemble the bottom half now. We've got the light upside down, but before I do that, the light socket will actually go in here and the bulb will stick up, and you can decide if you just want a plain bulb. You can put a fancy LED bulb in there if you want, but I just use a regular LED bulb. So what I built was, and I didn't show you this in the CAD, but what I built was I just cut two small rings that fit in the center here, and this paper is actually vellum, and you can see I just put a seam in the back here. So that's all I did. I glued it. It's a real challenge to glue, and you really need to use glue sparingly. I'm still working on the right thing to put here. What I'd really like to find is some 16th inch white acrylic to try and bend, but that's a lot more work. So anyway, this will work for now. So what I'll do is set that in first, and then we'll start at one of the joints here and get it started. And what I'll do is go to the other side and put one in. And you don't have to worry too much about wondering which one is the right alignment. It's pretty obvious when you put the flange in there. Okay, and you can see the shade I put in there just kind of floats around. It doesn't have to be tight. In fact, if it sits down a bit, it'll leave a bit of room for ventilation. Anyway, I'll just go ahead and put the rest of the flanges on here for the bottom, and we'll be pretty much finished. All right, we're down to the final step. I have just a light socket I picked up on Amazon. I can put a link down below. This one is nice because it has a switch and it's got a very long cord because I'm going to hang this from the ceiling. So all I really need to do here is stick the light socket in the hole and carefully, very carefully slide my hand up through that shade and screw that in without wrinkling my carefully made shade. And last thing, I'll put a light bulb in it. And again, equally careful. And there we go. So now the moment of truth, we'll plug it in and see what happens. And there we have it. A very nice light. So hopefully you enjoyed this more advanced project over some of the previous ones we've done. If you did, leave a comment down below. And of course, if there's projects you'd like to see along these lines, then also leave a comment, and I respond to all of these things. So get those comments in there, and hopefully you kind of make this project. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to hopefully get you all to do a bit of work for me. If you do want to build this, I'll make the SVG files available on Etsy. Now, what I wanted to do is initially make a 100% discount coupon for this, but unfortunately Etsy only lets me do a 70% discount. So what I can do is make the price ridiculously cheap. So as cheap as Etsy will let me make it, and then I give you that coupon code for, say, 30 days. And after that, I'll bring the price of the SVG collection up to something normal. It's probably normally going to be like $3 or $4, but you know, hopefully you can kind of do that. And if you do download it, I apologize for charging you because that's not my intent. But you know, if you do download it, please leave a comment and a 5-star review so that I can get my Etsy store up and running. It's coming towards the end of summer, so now I have more time to focus on it. Anyway, as a side note here, you may have noticed that when I was cutting the walnut, it's actually 1/8 inch walnut plywood, and it's 2 pieces of walnut, one on each side of the board, and MDF in the center, so it is pretty hard to cut, especially with like a 40 or 45 watt laser. So if you are having some struggles, then watch this video up above here, which talks about cutting things that are a little thicker or a little harder to cut. And if you do, I'll see you over there. Otherwise, go make your world, and I'll see you next time.